CAPER monthly webinar. You are, I think, the 10th pancreatologist we've had. And I know one of the issues was not a lot of good topics left to discuss, but I'm very happy to have you join us today. So I'm sure all of you have heard the name Peter Banks, but he's been one of mine and Julia's mentors throughout our brief career. Dr. Banks is currently the director of the Center of Pancreatic Disease here at Brigham and Women's, and he's served in that capacity since, I believe, 1993. Before that, correct me if I'm wrong, you were at St. Elizabeth's, right, as chief of GI for almost 20 years.
For almost how many years?
Was it 20 years?
Yeah, about 18 years. I didn't quite hear you. I thought you said 40 years. No, I was there for 18 years.
Thank you so much for joining. I think we all have a lot of questions we want to ask you and pick your mind about, but I'm going to let you go ahead and get started.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. First, I want to make sure you can all hear me. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of really nice individual topics were taken. So I thought I would talk about lessons learned, which means mistakes made, and also shift in quality of life. As sort of ideas that have been percolating in my head and things that have guided me. And so I hope this will just sort of get you thinking about things that are important in life and things that are important in your career. I'll try and say something about how to balance your life, which, as you know, is darn near impossible, but worth trying. So let me start. I'm going to break it out into several sections. First, your professional life, with particular emphasis on your role as a consultant. I want to talk to you about your patients. I want to talk to you about your family. I want to talk to you about your personal life. I want to talk to you about your involvement in the community. And then a couple words to sum up of 3 words which I think are among the most important words I can tell you about. So let's start about your professional life. I heard a little bit about what your career goals are. And the first thing I would tell you is to go for what you want and to aim high. You don't know what's going to happen. You're getting some sense of what your capability is. Don't be afraid to aim high. And I'll give you an example. When I finished just by way of history, I did my AB at Harvard. I did my medical school work at Columbia Medical School. I then was an intern and a resident at the Beth Israel. At that point, Iraq hadn't heated up, but we had to do military service of some kind. And the plum was to go to the NIH. And several people suggested I do that. I said, wait a minute, I really haven't done any meaningful research. Why in the world would they be interested in me? I delayed until the last minute because I really didn't think they would be interested in me. And the very last day on a Sunday, I got fingerprinted as we had to, and I got my application in and got interviewed. And the third person that interviewed me, an infectious disease in the laboratory clinical investigation, took me. I spent 2 years at the NIH doing clinical work and basic science, and it changed my life completely. I've always thought, what would have happened had I not got fingerprinted that last day? And so my lesson to you is, don't hold back and go for whatever you want. You just don't know what's going to happen. As David said, in my career, I was chief of gastrology at St. Elizabeth's. I actually left the Beth Israel at Harvard and had a Harvard appointment to do that. And, you know, once you're in the Harvard system, you don't really willingly, at least those days, go to another institution. Not that Tufts wasn't a good institution, it was an excellent institution. But it was an opportunity, and I asked myself, should I do this? It was an opportunity to start my own training program and to see how far I could go in a leadership role. And that was a good choice because I spent 18 years there and did establish a training program there, and then came to Brigham and Women's Hospital 26 years ago as director of clinical gastroenterology. So the lesson here is your career is going to zig and is going to zag, but just make sure every zig and every zag has a purpose and has a role to it. And don't be afraid that your career doesn't go from south to north straight up in a single line. That's a really hard thing to do. So some of you expressed what you want to do academically. So let me give you the particulars. First of all, if you're going to be an academic gastroenterologist who has an involvement with patient care, you've got to see patients. You cannot see patients just on the slide. This is going to be a major part of a curriculum. And I say that because of all the ways you can learn. You can learn from me, you can learn from other people, you can read textbooks, you can go to lectures. You learn the most about the nuances of the diseases from the patients you take care of. No question about that. And everyone who's been at this a long time will tell you that. You learn the most from your patients than anyone. So if this is something you want to do and you want to be a very good clinician, you've got to see patients. Secondly, you all want to teach, and you have to teach in an institution. That takes a certain amount of work. You have to read. You have to read whatever is suitable for reading, and that is, among other things, journals. And there are journals in every specialty. And yes, you're going to read pancreatology. You're going to read the pancreas. You're going to read gastroenterology. You're going to read digestive diseases and sciences. But you've got to make sure you've looked at the surgical literature, the basic science literature, the radiologic literature, and find some way with search engines to cull the articles that really are going to fill out your education. And when I say read, I mean read carefully and really understand the papers and understand the weaknesses of the papers, because all papers have weaknesses, and reject the ones that are not carefully done so you don't end up spouting off information that really is what I call fairy tales. There are three items of sophistication in what you teach other people. One is the hard facts, the other is soft facts, and the third are fairy tales. You want all the facts to be hard, which means you've looked at them rigorously. So when you say something, you've really thought it through, and the literature you've read or the experiences you've had are valid. You're going to want to give talks, and it takes time to prepare talks. I would ask you to spend a lot of time thinking about your slides. Most of the talks I see, the slides are inadequate. And they're usually inadequate because they can't be read. They're usually tables that are very complicated in small print. Make sure your slides can be read from the back of the room, and make sure that you don't overcrowd them with a lot of stuff that really isn't relevant, that whatever is on the slide is clear to be read, and the substance of what you're going to say. And then teach aloud. Do not read your slides. Teach, which means you've got to prepare this subject extremely well. You're going to want to do clinical research. Not everyone wants to do that. But if you're going to do clinical research, at some point early in your career, you've got to focus on one area. You can't be in multiple areas. It's gotten too tough to do that. So somewhere along the line, you've got to find where your niche is in your research. And I'm going to talk about clinical research rather than basic research. And you've got to keep working at it. You've got to get funding for the research you do. You've got to get collaboration with other people. What I think is very important, if you can do it, is get a master's in public health, which will really set you up to understand how to do good clinical research. At the very least, you should take a limited curriculum called clinical effectiveness, which in many institutions is the first 15 credits of the 45 credit master's program. That will give you the introduction you will need. And you should, if you don't feel comfortable with how to set up a study, how to conduct a study, how to interpret a study, link up with a statistician, meaning someone from the School of Public Health. And that's what I did early in my career. I linked up with someone at the Harvard School of Public Health who was junior faculty and basically was a colleague and a co-author of mine. And every paper I did, every randomized prospective trial I did, he was in it from the very beginning. He helped interpret the results. He is now a tenured professor, so I can't use him anymore. He's way beyond that. So my suggestion to you is to find a junior faculty person at your School of Public Health and work closely with that person to help you and guide you setting up studies and making sure it's done properly. At some point, and I would say early, if you're going to be an academic person, you got to think about participating in national organizations. And what I would suggest you do is you work with your program director to find a way to get involved with, say, the AGA or the American College of Gastroenterology, starting perhaps as on the research committee or starting on the education committee or reading abstracts. And hopefully at some point you'll evolve into a leadership position. If you are fortunate enough to get into a leadership position, such as on the Board of Trustees, it's an amazing experience. And your participation in national organizations by itself, even if you don't have a leadership role is an amazing experience because you will come to know people from all over the world, and they will become colleagues of yours, and then they will become friends of yours. And then if you and your significant other, as you go to meetings, you'll have relationships and friendships with people from around the world. And you get to know the kids of people from around the world. It's an absolutely extraordinary experience, which is open to you if you decide you want to participate in national organizations. This is, of the things I've done, this is one of the things I valued the most. Any questions about what I've said so far? Okay, let me talk about leadership a little bit. And I'm not going to, you can give a whole lecture on leadership. I just want to touch on a few things which I think are important in leadership. One is listen to others. Really keep an open mind and be prepared to make changes based on what you hear from other people. Now, sometimes you hear things that are not really phrased exactly the right way, and you might get irritated because someone may be just rubbing you the wrong way in the way they make a suggestion. Forget that part and think about the value of the suggestion. I'll give you one example. When I came to the Brigham, they had a basic science program, but they did not have a clinical program, clinical research program, and I started that. And what I did build into that, and we had one fellow to begin, one clinical fellow, is they went to the School of Public Health for the first 15 credits called clinical effectiveness. And the second person in the program, who was Mike Wallace, who many of you may know, who's now a leader in endoscopy, came to me and said, you know, I have to get a master's in public health. I now know something about statistics and epidemiology and a few other things, but if I'm really going to grow and got to be a clinical investigator, I need to get a master's. And if you will give me the time, I'll pay for it myself. Now, when someone says that to you, you got to pay attention to it. And fortunately, I did have some research funds, and I used those research funds for the next several years, and then got 2 endowments from grateful patients. And now we're in a situation we have 3 or 4 clinical fellows. They all take the first 15 credits of clinical effectiveness, which, by the way, is very expensive, and 1 or 2 every year go on to get a master's in public health. As I watched their careers, and by the way, I just heard from someone by email this morning who we trained 15 years ago, who I'm always in touch with. It's amazing what people who have completed this program and completed our fellowship have done in terms of their careers. The next thing I would say as leadership is give credit to others. We all get credit for things we don't deserve. Do not allow that to happen. I will give you an example. When I was at the NIH, there was a grand rounds involved the entire NIH community because a poor young lady who had some sort of GYN surgery got terribly sick, and someone got the idea she had gas gangrene. And it turns out she was operated on and did have gas gangrene. So the whole purpose of this grand rounds was to alert everyone to the dangers of gas gangrene and how to identify it. At the end of which, the person who ran the conference said to the director, the head of the OBGYN program, "Boy, that was a great pickup you made." And what he said was the following: "I missed it cold. It was my resident," and he mentioned it by name, "who made the diagnosis." Now, I never forgot that. That always meant something to me. So the answer, what I'm telling you is when other people do good things, even if you didn't do them, give credit to other people for what they've accomplished. Always a good idea. Third thing in leadership is to be a mentor and be a really good mentor, which means when you sit down with your mentee, you've got to set the stage so that in the eyes of the mentee, that you are the most important, that the mentee is the most important person in the eyes of the mentor at that moment in time. You cannot be on an iPhone. You cannot be rustling papers. You've got to have a situation where it's one-on-one in a quiet environment where the mentee really gets what the mentee should have, which is your undivided attention. Another aspect of leadership is integrity, which means don't gossip. One thing that drives me crazy, and I don't think it happens too much in medical people, but I hear it all the time in surgery, but I must say not at the Brigham, is that people take shots at one another because they feel better about themselves, because they can downplay what someone else has done. Do not get dragged into that kind of a scenario. Do no gossiping. And in integrity, if you promise something, you got to follow through on it. If we're ever making judgments, we're ever saying things we're going to do, make sure you do everything that you said you're going to do. And finally, I would say under leadership, help your colleagues. Unequivocally help your colleagues, which means if you have slides that someone else wants to borrow, And even though you worked long and hard to develop those slides, if someone else needs this for a talk, give it to them. When you're a teacher, you're a teacher unequivocally. You don't make conditions on how you teach or who you teach. I will give you an example of helping colleagues, which I heard about when I was a resident in gastroenterology at Mount Sinai Hospital. And that was, I went up to the operating room, and there was the chief of surgery in his scrubs, sort of going in and out of one of the rooms. And I was up there, and I said, I don't understand, what are you doing? He said, well, it's very, very simple. He said, I was the second opinion on a surgical case. A colleague of mine was going to do the surgery, but the patient insisted I see them, and then insisted I do the surgery. And I told him I could not do the surgery because my junior colleague is very well qualified, but I will be there in the operating room, and I will look over their shoulder, and I will watch everything, and I will be there to help if there's any question of any kind about the conduct of this surgery. And that stuck with me from 55 years ago, that a chief of surgery would give up an afternoon just to be available to a junior colleague to make sure the junior colleague didn't get aced out of a referral. And that's leadership. And the final thing on leadership is know your staff, know the people you work with, know your secretaries, know something about them. And one of the joys in my life is I'm still in touch with people who are my secretaries and administrative assistants from 20 and 30 and 40 years ago. I've seen their children grow up. I've gone to their events. It's another area of your being alive that really makes, I won't say makes life worthwhile, but just makes you feel good about what role you're playing in other people's lives. All right, that's about professional. Anything about professionalism that someone wants to bring up before I go to your role as a consultant? And can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Are we good? David, any thoughts?
I have a quick question. So you've been at this for a while. You said over 50 years. Is there anything you feel like we don't do as well nowadays that you feel like gastroenterologists did better 20, 30 years ago?
I think you're all doing things better. I think the problem you're having now, which I never had in my training or earlier on, is the time to make good decisions. When I hear that you got to see a return patient in 20 minutes and a new patient in 40 minutes, where the new patient really requires an hour and a half, I don't know how you do it. And so I think the problem is you're being wedged unfairly and not being and having difficulty being all that you can be because there's a time clock that's working against you. And I think that's very sad. And it's the way things are right now. Everyone's in double motion. I think that we probably spent more time in my training in physiology and did more in terms of journal club, where we really explored the literature very carefully. I think the world's gotten too complicated and your lives have gotten too complicated. And the training that you're doing has become much more intensive than what we did because there's much more to learn. I think that's the way of the world. I think the present trainees are just as good as the trainees always were. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Does
Okay.
anyone else have any questions?
All right. All right, let me go on to how to be a really good consultant. Again, I'm just giving you some pointers. There's no way I can go into great details because everything I'm talking about is really an hour lecture in itself. But there's some things I think are really important in your role as a consultant. First of all, when you see a new patient, you got to know whether this is a patient that you're going to continue to take care of, which is usually the case if an internist sees it's from an internist, or whether it's uncertain as to what your role is going to be, which is what happens when it comes from a colleague in gastroenterology. Now, if it comes to you having been seen by another gastroenterologist, but the patient found out about you independently and has made a decision that he or she doesn't want to go back to the first gastroenterologist, you probably have no responsibility to that first gastroenterologist because the patient made a decision. On the other hand, if the decision was for you to be seeing the patient as a second opinion, either the patient wants it that way but expects to go back to the first doctor, or the referring doctor you can assume wants to continue to take care of the patient, it gets a little tricky. And you've got to know in the context of what you tell the patient and what happens to the patient when the patient leaves your office, which is going to take place. If the patient is coming to you because another doctor has made this happen, you are honor bound to send that patient back to the referring gastroenterologist. This is not a situation where because the patient says, I want to see you because I like you better. From an ethical standpoint, you can't do that. And what you can do is when you write your letter to the referring doctor, which I do in pretty much anyhow, is I say, I'm always available if you need some more help. If you'd like me to see the patient again, I'd be glad to see the patient again, but that's between you and the patient. And I always give, in my letters to referring doctors, I always put in my cell phone so that the doctor has no trouble reaching me. As you yourselves always know, when you call another doctor, you first go through the alphabet soup. If you're lucky, you'll find some secretary who's pinch hitting for the real secretary, so the message never gets to the doctor you want to talk to. I find it really helpful to leave your own cell phone number. People do not take advantage of this, and I find that some of my referring doctors keep calling me on my cell phone because they want to refer patients. It's the easy way to get my attention, and it works. And that's what you want. You want to see good patients from good referring doctors. Secondly, frequently enough, you're going to make a decision and you're going to say, gee, that referring doctor had it all wrong. It's easy to say, gosh, am I smart and was he dumb? It's not that simple. Frequently enough, patients early on don't tell the whole story. So the first doctor doesn't really hear everything. Maybe he's not as smart as you, but give the other doctor the benefit of the doubt. It may well be he didn't have all the information. But it's really important that in your relationship to this patient that you do several things. Well, I would say one thing. One is do not set yourself up against the referring doctor that you solved the problem. He just wasn't smart enough to solve the problem. And one thing that I find helpful to say is the following. Something to the effect that, you've been under the care of several gastroenterologists for the last 3 or 4 years. I now have the benefit of all this information, including some new information they didn't have available to them. And now I think we can go in this direction, which basically does not slam the first or second gastroenterologist. It establishes a strong relationship with the patient in front of you, which is what you really want to do. You do not want to have referring doctors mad at you for a number of reasons. First of all, you don't want to be that kind of a person. Secondly, you want that person to feel good about you and keep referring patients to you, and you want to continue to see these patients. So having a certain amount of tact is really very, very important. Next thing is, and let me preface it by saying, I see a lot of patients in consultation, and many of them have already been seen by several gastroenterologists who are good in the field. And I have access to those letters, and those letters are terrible. First of all, they're frequently written by a fellow who doesn't know as much as the attending, and the attending didn't put much effort into the letter itself. Secondly, there's always frequently enough incorrect information and myths that have been passed on from doctor to doctor. Therefore, when you see a patient, you must review everything personally, going back to the first time the patient had evidence of that disease. This takes time. Takes a lot of time. Secondly, if there are images involved, you've got to review them yourself, and also review them with one of your best radiologists, where you really know the case. You've got to obtain all this information. Then you will have an opportunity to make a good decision on the basis of the information. If something really is bad going on, make it a point to call the referring doctor immediately, as hard as it is to reach them. Then when you write the letter, write it yourself. Your letter should be no longer than 1 page. No cutting and pasting. The other doctor couldn't care less what the official report is of this or the 7 pages of lab values. He just wants to know, what do you think? So your history can be very brief for the major part. The physical exam can be pertinent. The review of the labs is what's the chief positives and chief negatives. And he wants to know, what in the world do you think? What are you going to do about it? And make sure you have some details in about what you want to do and how that person and how to actually do it. And always leave the opportunity open. If you want to discuss this case further, I'd be glad to hear from you. Here's my cell phone number, which means communications are wide open. And always in the letter to the other doctor, thank the doctor for the privilege of seeing them, because it is a privilege to see patients from other doctors. In the context of what I'm saying, it is very important you dispel myths and get rid of inaccuracies that have crept into the record. You all now have had the experience that you're seeing a patient for the 7th episode of well-documented chronic pancreatitis. And when you review the record, it's all bogus. Patient never had pancreatitis, but he got carried forth from day one because no one really looked at the first hospitalization and no one really gave enough thought to it. I encourage you all to read a book by Jerome Groopman, Groopman, entitled How Doctors Think. It was written in 2007. It's valid today. And in that book, you will see something called diagnosis momentum. That means once the diagnosis gets in the chart, you can't get it out of the chart. Because no matter what you say, the next person who writes their admission note saying, patient now with a 9th episode of well-documented chronic pancreatitis. So you do not want to contribute to myths. If you're the first person on the scene, make sure you get it right. Any thoughts about being a consultant before I move on to patients themselves? Okay. So you got to listen to your patients. You got to make sure that they have your attention. It's important, I think, to get to know patients. There are things that come out in the context of an interview, and I still do it in an old-fashioned way. And among things I always ask patients, just as an anecdote, is I ask them, do they exercise? And one lady says, I'm a bad tennis player, but my good friend Andre Agassi always plays with me. And I then launched into a conversation about Andre Agassi, who, by the way, whose legacy is going to be in education, because after he got through playing tennis at a high level, he founded a school in Las Vegas from kindergarten through high school. And his kids all go on to college. These are kids who have nothing going for them. They all get scholarships to college. He's now done this around the country. And would you know, a week later, I got a call from Andre Agassi thanking me. He sent me his tennis racket, and when I went to a fundraiser in Las Vegas, I was sitting next to Andre Agassi and Steffi Graf. Now, it was kind of an interesting experience, but I'm just using this to say, the more they get to know the patient, the better you are taking care of them, and this was just something good that happened. Always make sure you respond to their calls, either you or your physician assistant. It's really a bad thing when patients call 3 and 4 times and no one gets back to them. Find a way with your physician assistant to make sure patients are well taken care of. If you're taking care of a patient who's sick with chronic pancreatitis, as you all do, you know how hard it is to take care of them. And there comes a point where you're at a dead end. You've done everything possible. The pain is unremitting. Whatever it is you've tried, you're out of ideas. Bring up the idea of a second opinion. You can be assured that that's already on the agenda of the patient, but they're afraid to bring up the subject. Better you bring up the subject, refer the patient to someone else. It's likely that the patient coming back will say he said exactly or she said exactly what you said. But if it turns out that the other doctor has a good idea, support it. I mean, none of us is invincible. Other people do have good ideas. Be very encouraging and just be very positive about anything that has to do with patients in terms of patient care. Some of your patients will have already gotten a second opinion. They come back to you and say, you know, I'm really embarrassed. I should have told you, but I've seen Dr. So-and-so next door. And, you know, your body language is important. Your patient is on thin ice right now. A patient still wants to be your patient usually. And if you show a demeanor that is dismissive or insulted or something like that, body language counts for everything. Always be positive. Ask, what did the other doctor say? And if it's a good idea, say, that's a really good idea. Let's do that. Usually a patient wants to stay with you because you've shown how important, how good the relationship is. And if someone else has a better day, that's all to the good. Anything else you want to hear about patients, about relationships to patients? I'd say a couple other things. If a patient of yours dies, always write a condolence note. It is incredibly appreciated, incredibly appreciated. If it's someone that you have a real relationship with, make a condolence call. If you get to the funeral, it's amazing what you learn at a funeral of someone you took care of, someone you may have known for 20 or 30 years, and you hear about things at the funeral you never knew. It's an amazing experience to really hear about a patient you were taking care of and all the things about that patient, some of which you just didn't know about. The other thing I would say is sometimes your patient doesn't follow your advice. And sometimes it's a situation where your advice not only is good, but if the patient doesn't follow that advice, the patient's going to get into some serious trouble. Two things. One is always write a letter to the patient explaining very clearly why you've made the suggestion, and make sure that, and with a strong recommendation, the patient call you back. The second thing is I call the patient and the wife or husband in, And if I still have the objection, I say, look, I said, I frequently have a situation, or I sometimes have a situation where I've given, I think, my best advice. Things go sour. Patient comes back 3 months later and said, doctor, you know how much I trust you. If you had only insisted. I then, in talking to the patient, say, I want you to know, as I'm talking to you right now, I am insisting. And I sometimes find that the better advantage. So the patient has no wiggle room in trying to figure out or trying to block out what is really very, very good. If you tell them in some way or other how important it is, usually your patient will follow that advice. Got to say something about a family. And this is the hardest part of all, and the part I'll probably say the least about. It's an impossible situation, almost, to balance work with home life. Frankly, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how the women in medicine can follow the women who are in medicine, who are trying to balance a family life and taking care of children and doing everything at work. It's so difficult. I cannot imagine that. And all I can suggest, among other things, is that you make the time, which means you plan ahead, which means that you have thought about the next week or 10 days, and you have reserved time that is for the family. And that time, unless a crisis comes up, is for your family. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The second thing I would say is the next time you agree to do something, say participate in a chapter, or write an article, and you find yourself at home, and you're isolated yourself in your office or your study, and you're writing that, ask yourself, is this what I really want to do tonight? If the answer is no, remember that. The next time someone asks you to do something that you find, from your experience, is not mainstream in your career objectives, say no. The second thing is, if you're giving talks and you find yourself in a hotel room, and you're going to give the talk the next day, and you ask yourself, is this really where I really want to be tonight? Is this talk tomorrow important? Is it important for the people I'm talking to? Is it important for my career? Is it something I can tell them they don't know, and therefore I'm doing good? If you're not sure the answer to those questions are yes, just say to yourself, remember tonight, and the next time someone asks me to do something that I now have a better sense of is really not mainstream and all the things that I think is really important in life, say no from the onset. And actually, at one point in my life, I had a colleague who was a radiologist, an academic radiologist I worked with, and we had a plan that if he was asked to do something, before he said yes, he had to run it by me, and my job was to find a way to tell him to say no if I thought it was superfluous, and vice versa. And that worked out pretty well. Again, any thoughts about family? I told you it's the least I would say. It's the hardest thing to do. I don't know how to do it. You've got to find your way. You've got to talk to your family. You got to make sure you take good care of your family. At the end of the day, this is what much more important than the extra paper you write. At the end of the day, taking care of your family is the most important thing. Any questions? Are you still listening? Hello? You still there?
Right here.
Okay. All right. So let me finish up with two things in terms of your personal life. I really would encourage all of you to have a hobby. Maybe all of you do have a hobby. I really admire physicians who do woodcraft, who do painting, who do things that are really interesting that allows them, I'll use the word solitude. I'm going to come back to the word solitude in a minute, or allows them to balance their lives. My hobby is tennis. Love tennis. I love to read. I love to read history. I really love to read history. Try to make time for that. Try to make time for tennis. But as I say, I really admire people who have unusual or really skill sets that they're a lifetime hobby for them. Secondly, is stay healthy. We're all vulnerable, and we all see colleagues at one time or other in life who have the misfortune of bad health. And you're lucky if you have good health, but don't just be lucky. Take care of yourselves. Have regular checkups. Do not take care of yourself. Have the doctor take care of you. We're all subject to making some terrible decisions. One of my favorite surgeons was in a meeting in the Midwest and had melena. Got on a plane and flew back to Boston, checked in the hospital. And I said to myself, is that crazy? What was he thinking? Anyone He would be called any doctor, his own doctor in St. Louis would say, go to the nurse emergency ward, don't get on an airplane. How could someone be so foolish? And let's just say we are that person. We can all be that foolish. So pay some attention to all the things that are required to stay healthy. Solitude. I'm a believer in solitude. By that I mean when you're in front of the elevator, it's going to be 5 or 10 minutes. You know what you're going to do. You're going to get on your cell phone. You're going to look at your messages. Do not do that. Think of something else. Think of your family. Think of something good in life. Or at the very least, think of something that is on your mind. None of us is perfect. We all make mistakes in judgment. It takes us sometimes too long to come to the right diagnosis. One of my favorite things to do when I've taken too long to come to a diagnosis is to ask myself, why did it take so long? And usually the explanation is right in front of you why it took so long. And it can be any one of a number of things. But make sure you reconcile in your own mind why it was it took so long to come to the right diagnosis, and put that into your armamentarium so the next time you put it to work so it doesn't take so much time. Also, give some thought when you have time for your relationships with your colleagues. And the one thing I would tell you is when you make a mistake, apologize for it. No ifs, ands, or buts. You just apologize. And I will give you an anecdote. Many years ago when I was still at St. Elizabeth's, I knew David Carlock very barely, and I found myself at an AGA symposium on ERCP and severe gallstone pancreatitis. He had just written that first paper in Lancet, which had a lot wrong with it. You still with me? I heard lots of noise. You guys still with me?
We're here.
Okay. And he was the pro and I was the con. And I got kind of full of myself. And I probably said too much. He came on too strong in making the argument about why he hadn't made the case in his paper. And afterwards, I really regretted that. I regretted it so much that when they sent me a disc, I didn't want to look at it. I thought it'd be too painful to look how badly I'd misbehaved in public. And a year later, I was at a meeting in Germany with him. And I went up and I apologized to him for what I thought was an excess on my part. And his response was very interesting. He said, you know, I didn't think it was so bad. What you said was true. But in my mind, I'd overstated the case. So I learned something from that. And that is, and then, of course, a few years later, here I am at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and David Carlock is there. We became good colleagues and good friends. Do not hesitate to apologize when you've done something that you really think was had overstepped. And finally, in the community. You are going to be in a community. As physicians, we are somewhat isolated from a community for so many years. We go through medical school, we go through house staff training, we go from city to city. We're really vagabonds sometimes. And you never really link on to a community, but link on to the community you're living in. Do something in that community that's important. Volunteer in one way or another, such as your church, your synagogue, sit on boards. I was a town meeting member in Brookline for 6 years. I really loved it. Develop a relationship with the organizations that are important to you. If you're interested in the pancreas, be involved with the National Pancreas Foundation. You'll learn a lot from that. You'll appreciate that. And finally, when it comes to community, I got to say something about philanthropy. You're all in debt, so this will be on debt fears, but one day you're not going to be in debt, and one day you may have some financial resources. When you have financial resources, pay it forward, which means be philanthropic to the extent that you can to make opportunities available to other people going through their career, whether it's in medicine or whether it's in some other aspect, whether it's has to do with people who are underprivileged. There are so many worthwhile philanthropies that deserve everyone's attention. So when you're able to be philanthropic, pay it forward. And finally, I would end up by saying, and I think I'm in pretty good time, the way I think about things about being a doctor, I think it's important, despite all that's going on and all the aggravation you have and all the difficulty it is keeping your head above water, your glass is always half full, not half empty, and your glass is always more than half full. It's a tremendous privilege to help others. It's a tremendous privilege to have an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others, and I try not to forget that. And there are 3 words that I think are important to me. 3 words that reflect human qualities. One is gratitude. Wherever you go, you will have gotten there because a lot of people helped you get there. Be grateful and make sure you provide that opportunity to other people. Second word is humility. None of us is perfect. Do not get ahead of yourself. You may get honors, you may be getting awards of one kind or another, but in reality, you're just another guy doing as good a job as you can, and don't get too full of yourself, even though other people may be saying nice things about you. And the third is empathy, because we got into the whole profession of medicine because we had empathy for the plight of other people. Those are the three words which are my touchstone words: gratitude, humility, and empathy. And that's all I have to tell you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Banks. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I have one question, Dr. Banks. You mentioned the mistake you made when you felt like you overstepped with Dr. Carlock. I'm wondering, in terms of mistakes you may have made clinically when it came to misdiagnosing or just diagnosing too late certain conditions, how do you own up to those mistakes? How do you communicate with patients that you've made a mistake?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, which has a life of its own, because a lot of institutions, including our own, have opened the doors for patients and doctors to get together in a room even, and when an apology is needed, to make that apology. What I had in mind was that it just took me longer than I thought it should have taken me to come to a decision about what's really wrong with the patient. And that's so many reasons. This is not a question of having terrible judgment. It's just a question of putting things together and coming up with the right answer. But if I have taken too long to make a good diagnosis, or if someone else has made a diagnosis and I missed, I acknowledge that to the patient.
Right. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Banks?
Dr. Banks, this is Venkat from Baltimore. Thank you again for coming on this webinar. And these are incredibly important lessons. And personally, I learned a lot. And I'm sure this will stick with us for a long time. And this audio we will be recording and posting on the website so that many more can listen to this. And one question I wanted to ask you is a little bit regarding pancreatology training. Especially because in the past year, I was trying to get into a formal pancreatology training. And on our website, you can see the list of formal pancreatology programs we have in United States. So we try to make it accessible. And we have only 3 pancreatology programs formally that I know of, medical pancreatology programs in the United States. So similar to how hepatology is and how some of the other GI subspecialty programs are, should we have a formal curriculum like how medical pancreatology programs should be, and what the minimum things that they should be able to learn, and how comprehensive it should be with the pancreatology training? And about the need, so do you think someone coming out of a program with medical pancreatology, will they be able to sustain themselves at an academic institution, large academic, smaller academic, and outside? So for hepatology, there are a lot of requirements. I see a lot of hepatologists coming in. There are a lot of programs. And so if we have some programs built in for pancreatology, can we sustain ourselves?
Okay, first of all, the only 2 programs I'm aware of is the Mayo Clinic, which has always been a program. I think Darwin Conwell is trying to establish a program at Ohio State. Which is the 3rd program?
So the 3rd is at UPMC, Dr. Yadav. So he, in the last couple of years, he started this medical pancreatology training, where there are also separate rotations with radiology, pathology, surgery, and other things, and along with the pain management. And I got input from these 2 programs, and we started at Hopkins starting this year on medical pancreatology, along with rotations in all these ancillary fields related to pancreatology.
Okay, first of all, there's a real need for this. And I say that because the people up to this point who are interested in the pancreas usually go into therapeutic endoscopy. And if they are really interested in the pancreas, this gives them a leg up because they're seeing patients with difficult pancreas problems. And if they are willing to see patients on an ambulatory setting, the combination of doing that and doing the therapeutic endoscopy exposes them to a lot of the issues. and so they have the capability. Unfortunately, what happens in therapeutic endoscopy is that most people get buried, and they get buried with things that have nothing to do with the pancreas, doing things that are therapeutic in other areas, and they find it difficult to really, if you will, specialize in the pancreas. So that the therapeutic endoscopy route is not going to work unless someone really is devoted to the pancreas and is using the therapeutic endoscopy specifically to complement the medical aspects of it. And as a result, we have very few what I call medical pancreatologists in the country. And we have a real need for this because many hospitals have no one who is interested in taking care of medical pancreas patients long term. We're in the process of doing the administrative work to establish a pancreas program, a medical pancreas program for the 4th year. And I gather the programs you're talking about are 4th year programs. Is that correct?
Yes.
What Yadav is doing is a 4th year program after 3 years of regular GI training.
That's correct, and it's a non-ACGME, so they can also accept international people or those without GI training. They can be directly from resident.
Right. Yeah, and we're beginning to. I've already had meetings with administration, and we're beginning to sketch this out. And I've got to do a lot of work to write down the specifics of it, so it can be approved, and then I can advertise it. So the answer to your question is, this is a tremendous need, and most hospitals, whether they be large or small, including some of the major academic centers, have no medical pancreas people. They do have therapeutic endoscopists, some of whom are really good at this, and others who don't have a particular interest in the pancreas, but a great interest in therapeutic endoscopy. So the answer to your question is we need more programs.
And you think people coming out of this program can sustain themselves at other non-large academic programs?
When you say sustain yourself, I'm not sure what you mean. You're telling me that we're talking about people who had 3 years of general gastroenterology and they had some pancreas in there, took a full concentrated 1 year as a 4th year pancreas program, and you're asking, you think that at that point they're qualified to pick up and to do a good job as a leader, if you will, in a hospital to establish a medical pancreas program of their own?
Because sometimes I heard that people, when they go to non-large academic programs, their practice gets diluted with non-pancreas related things. So though they want to do much more pancreas, I'm not sure how true that is.
Yeah, I don't know how true that is because, as you know, as you look at the surveys of hospitalized patients in the United States, pancreatitis is either first, second, or third each year in terms of number of admissions. So every hospital needs someone who's qualified to take care of patients with pancreatitis. So I have a feeling that if someone was well trained, in other words, if you're concerned that once you get through a program like this, will you have a life in front of you that you can establish yourself as a pancreas specialist in either a large hospital or small hospital? I think the answer is yes. I really do. I think that it's a situation that if hospitals don't know they have the need, they haven't given enough thought to it, because the patients are there and they need specialized attention, and they're not getting the specialized attention. Once someone is on site who has an interest in taking care of these patients, they will come. I thought part of your question was, if you spend 1 year in a 4th year program for medical pancreas, are you now in a position to really be good at this? The answer is yes. I would say that, for example, in our hospital, we spend so much time on pancreas. If someone in the context of the fellowship has expressed an interest to be a pancreas person, there's great opportunity to do that without the need of a 4th year program. But you have to be in an institution that's a Center for Pancreatic Disease, where you see a lot of patients and you have a lot of opportunity to hone your skills.
Yeah, that's encouraging, and I hope we can see the curriculum that you create so that it can be standardized across other institutions too.
Yeah, where did you see the listing of the other 3 programs?
So we have posted this on our website, like CAPER. We have our website, caperpancreas.org. I can send you the list. And so I can
do that to me, because I should have seen that. I haven't seen it. Because my hope is that within the next 6 months, our program our program has got to go through an administrative review. It's already gone through the first administrative review. Now it has to go through an in-depth administrative review. When that happens, then we can start the program. There's always the question of financing the program, which is another issue I'm dealing with.
I had one additional question. This is Anna Phillips from UPMC. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. I'm actually the first graduate, incidentally, of the UPMC medical pancreatology program. But I had an additional question, actually, which is within the pancreas community, in terms of early leadership positions in national organizations and so forth. Has there been any, I guess, start, or are you aware of any ways that young faculty members can get involved in some of the whether it's APA committees or be part of, journal editorial boards, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of things I would say. That's a great question. It's nice to hear from you. To some extent, your program director can be helpful to you by talking to individuals who are now the leadership of the various organizations, whether it be the pancreas section of the AGA, whether it be the American Pancreas Association, or they have positions in the Journal Pancreas or the Journal of Pancreatology. And to some extent, the people who are your mentors can offer your name for these opportunities. The second thing is that you got to go to meetings, and when you go to meetings, you got to meet and should meet the people who are in a position of responsibility. And once you meet someone in a position of responsibility, it's, I won't say automatic, but very likely that person who's looking for young people, because all leaders in the field are looking for young people to continue what they're doing. But once you've made the connection and offer yourself as someone who's interested in doing things, the likelihood is that you will be given a responsibility such as being on a review committee for abstracts. What I've always encouraged the AGA and the American College of Gastroenterology is to bring young people for their noon conferences or 7 a.m. conferences. In other words, at all these major national meetings, they always have a 7 a.m. meeting and then they have noon meetings where they trot out a real an all-pro person to have lunch or breakfast with 15 or 20 people. I think you probably have done it yourself. I said they're losing a great opportunity if they don't have a younger person such as you, just out of training, who's trying to who's got good stuff but wants to do more, to be part of that. And so what I say and what I've told the leadership is the older person will ride shotgun, the younger person will run the conference. If obviously there's a problem along the way and the younger person can't answer a question, the older person is right there to ride shotgun. But give the younger person a chance to show what he or she can do in a forum, such as a breakfast meeting or a luncheon meeting. How easy is that? And they haven't done it enough, but I've always made this as a good opportunity for younger people to get involved. And obviously, as you present papers at national meetings, you'll have face and name recognition, and hopefully at some point you will then be asked to teach in a postgraduate course. Mm-hmm. It may take a few years, but it'll happen. And so this is multifactorial. One is to stay active in the field, if this is what you want to do, to offer yourself up, to make sure your program director offers you up, to participate in these activities and obviously do a very good job, and good things will happen.
Okay.
But I would say the first thing is to have your chief, if this is what you want to do, go to your chief and say you'd like to do this. It's up to your chief to open up some of the doors, and it's up to you at meetings to help yourself by even going up to people and saying hello.
Okay, thank you.
We wish we had more younger medical pancreatologists, and so I've talked to the leadership, the people who are now in charge of the various organizations. They really want to hear who the younger people are, and they're very anxious to give them a chance to show what they can do.
Maybe one more final question. No. Okay. I think we're all out of questions. Thank you, Dr. Banks, for joining us today. I think this has been a tremendously successful and educational webinar. And with that, maybe we'll conclude right on time at 3 o'clock. Unless
Okay, well, it's my pleasure to do this. I hope that some of what I had to say resonated.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, you're very welcome. Bye-bye now.
Take care.